Well, good morning, everybody. Well, of course, I think, like many other speakers, I will welcome the Green Paper. I think it would be difficult to find someone who would not applaud to it. However, at this point in time, I think we're still to look at it in much details. We're accountants, and we will analyze the paper in detail before coming up with concrete proposals that Graham was looking for. So at this stage, I think what I'm really offering is a number of initial, I think, personal views. And you know, while I think the objectives are right, we need to be very honest with ourselves. And if we want to succeed this time with the integration of our capital markets, I think we need to ask ourselves the difficult questions. We need to take a very pragmatic approach to change, and we will have to all join forces. So, if you look at the difficult questions, well, I think the first one is really to know, and the Green Paper, I think, in this respect is right. The Green Paper acknowledges that some of the issues are really of a cultural nature. And the Green Paper mentions risk appetite, the reluctance, especially in the SME sector sometimes, to be transparent, to give up control. So I think these are very important issues, but I actually doubt that legislators have the power to change culture. And the other thing, despite the optimism that we have, is to really wonder why, after 50 years of efforts, we're going to be successful today, at a time where I'm afraid the appetite for European integration is at its lowest. So there is money, I think, and we have plenty of savings on the continent. I fully agree, maybe not necessarily on the right instrument, as has been said. But I think the interesting point is that when you speak to venture capitalists or you speak to other intermediaries, including bankers, I think, one of the remarks that I find striking and that comes back all the time is that what we are missing very often is good projects that have the right risk balance, that have leadership, and that actually are really innovative. So that, I think, is an important thing that we have to look at. Now, one of the problems as well is that member states don't only have different cultures and political traditions. They're competing. They're competing for investment, they're competing for jobs, and they're competing for tax income. And stock markets are competing as well. So when everybody comes to the negotiating table, I think competition is very much in the back of their mind. And in addition, when you look at some of the most difficult issues that will have to be tackled in the context of a Green Paper, like tax law, like insolvency, well, most of that very often falls outside of the remit of the European Commission. So there is actually another more fundamental question that I would like to ask, which is the growth, the kind of growth that we would like to have. And it's interesting to see that a few years ago, it was all about sustainability. If you remember, in 2009, I think someone who was the Commissioner for Sustainability in the UK, Tim Jackson, came with a very interesting report, Prosperity Without Growth. And the point that he was making was that growth is not endless, and that today on the continent, growth is not decoupled from overconsumption of finite resources. Most recently, there was another very interesting bestseller, actually, that everybody, I'm sure, looked at in the room, and it's the book from Thomas Piketty, who was making this point, well, many points, but one of the points that maybe we need to keep in mind in this context as well, is that growth is actually not necessarily meaning jobs and social inclusion. So it's a bit disappointing that the Green Paper actually only talks about these issues in relation to green bonds. And having said that, I fully agree that green bonds have to be also supported. Now, in the interest of time, I'd just like to look at a couple of practical examples, because I think my point on managing change and the importance of doing no harm first has been very well addressed by the previous speaker. So in practice, well, I think capital markets are really based on trust and transparency. I'm again going to disappoint Graham because being a lawyer working for accountants, I don't think I'm going to be discussing, who's reporting on who. However, I think the point I would like to make is that we should not go into illusions. We should not fool ourselves, and information doesn't come for free. Information has a cost, and whether we're talking about the prospectus directive or the preparation of financial statements, I think information has to be produced, it has to be verified, it has to be disseminated, and we should look at it as an investment, not as a cost. So we should not save by disinvesting. I think that's the wrong thing to do. The Green Paper notes that there are substantial costs, fixed costs, associated with regulatory requirements linked to the issuance of equity or debt underwriting. But I agree, that this has to be reviewed with a view to strike a better balance than what we have today. But again, it's an investment, not a cost. It is the price of investors' protection, public confidence, and stability. So due diligences and disclosures will remain indispensable for healthy markets. I think the Green Paper also very rightly acknowledges the value added of IFRS. The International Financial Reporting Standards have done a lot, actually, to integrate our capital markets in Europe. And this view of the Green Paper, I think, is consistent with the views of a vast majority of stakeholders, maybe with a couple of minor exceptions, sometimes heard in the European Parliament. And it's also consistent, I think, with the work that is conducted by the European Commission on its evaluation of the IFRS regulation. But the Green Paper also questions the cost for SMEs and whether suggestions should be made to have a specific accounting standards for mid-caps. Well, I'm not opposed, I think, to the idea, but I think we should be clear that it shouldn't be at the expense of the necessary transparency and quality of financial statements. I think we should also, to be in line with one of the key objectives of the Green Paper, i.e. to integrate Europe to the world capital markets, we should make sure that we stick to global standards. We shouldn't, I believe, build a European standard for SMEs and try to turn Europe into a fortress. So, in this respect, a number of proposals have been made to use a standard IFRS for SMEs as a possible solution for mid-cap. However, I think this would be based on a conceptual misunderstanding, as this standard IFRS for SMEs is really based and aimed at companies that have no public accountability. So I don't think it is the right instrument, and this is a matter that we should resolve in dialogue with the international standard setter, with the IASB. Now, when it comes to SME credit scoring, well, I think it's interesting. We spoke about consistency of policies and the need to have a holistic approach. And we can't really base credit scoring on anything else than accounting information. And actually, in 2013, when the accounting directive was finally adopted after more than 6 years of debate, I think we missed the opportunity to have a real European framework for accounting of SMEs, and we therefore make it more difficult today to come up with good and cost-effective solutions for SMEs credit scoring. And a final word maybe on securitization and financial innovation, which I think is essential. However, I think it's an issue, I think, innovation that in general we don't look at with a lot of rationality. When politicians are setting the goal of enabling modest households to buy property, we start loading subprime securitization. But when we see the harm, then we start actually blaming subprime securitization. So I'm afraid that with financial innovation, very often the only lab is real life. And again, it's all about striking the right balance. It's all about making transparent who is bearing the cost and who is bearing the responsibilities. So we need to learn our lessons and make sure that when we do securitization, we maybe recycle an old formula and make sure that we don't only internalize profits and externalize losses. So there would be, I think, many more examples that we could be talking about, but in the interest of time, I will stop here.